7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
It's now time for the Pony Cake Sports Podcast with your hosts, Josh Stevens, Tim Thompson, and Tom Schultz. Woo!
Hey there, everybody. We are back with another episode, and as always, I am here with Tom, and Tim is MIA today. He's got some family stuff going on, but other than that, Tom, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good, Josh. It's good to be back. I haven't been around the last couple weeks. I'm glad Tim's not here, too. Yeah. You know, this is kind of refreshing not having to do a podcast with him. I've had a couple weeks off from doing that, so I feel all rejuvenated, ready to get back into it.
All refreshed and ready to go. That's good. And Tim is no, I guess he is to thank for that, right?
Yeah.
That would be the term, I guess. But we are bringing everybody a new segment for you today. It is called what, Tom?
Keep, trade, and cut.
So, very interesting topic here. We are going to bring up three players pretty close to the ADP around each other. And what we're going to suggest is who you should keep or who we would keep, why we would keep them, who we're going to cut, why we would cut them, and who out of those three we would trade. So if you were like one of those guys that ended up getting three people on the same team last year, three rookie running backs or three wide receivers, chances are it didn't happen. But if you had the option in a dynasty league, that's possible. So
yeah, it's gonna bring up some good talking points. We're talking about three rookie running back, through second year sophomore running backs coming into the league, and they're all pretty close in ADP. And we're gonna be hitting wide receivers that are ranked in the 20s and the 30s, 40s, even top 10 wide receivers. But it's a good exercise to get talking and to show the listeners and tell the listeners why we like certain players, why we're higher on certain players, and it should just be a good, fun talking point for us to get at for the rest of the fantasy football season.
So let's talk about the three guys that we have on the docket today. We have running backs. Again, like Tom alluded to, sophomores. Dalvin Cook, Christian McCaffrey, Joe Mixon. Of course, Dalvin Cook is on the Vikings. Christian McCaffrey is on the Panthers. Joe Mixon is on the Bengals. Some of the key things that you do have to remember about some of these guys, Dalvin Cook, coming off of a torn ACL from last year, should be 100% healthy. They do have a new quarterback this year with Kirk Cousins coming into town. They they lost Jerick McKinnon in free agency. And then if you look over at Christian McCaffrey, with Christian McCaffrey, you have the loss of running back
Jonathan Stewart.
The addition of CJ Anderson. And then Joe Mixon have an upgraded offensive line. So, very interesting on where these guys should fall out to in our rankings. I think we're going to be a little all across the board here. But let's go ahead and start off. Which one do you want to do first? Your keep?
We can do keep.
All right. So, Tom, give me the player that you're going to keep out of those three and why.
For me, I will be keeping Joe Money Mixon. You know, there's a lot of negativity around Joe Mixon right now. He's on the three running backs we were talking about. He is being drafted latest out of these three. So some people might be looking at me like I'm kind of foolish, but you got to look at the whole picture with Joe Mixon. Look, last season, that offensive line, it was horrendous. That whole offense in general was horrendous. That offense, they're the lowest producing offense in terms of yards last season. They've scored 7 points or fewer 5 times. And that offense really never got going because of that offensive line. Joe Mixon encountered first contact faster than any running back last season when running the football. That's saying something. They upgraded the center position, drafted Billy Price from Ohio State. He was a first-round draft pick. They got Cordy Glenn from the Buffalo Bills, upgrade at the left tackle spot. They also have a new coach on that offensive line. Got him from the Dallas Cowboys. That team has been known for running the football, being a smash-mouth football team, and Frank Pollock is going to do that for the Cincinnati Bengals. And when you're looking for bell cow running backs, something that's super important is their receiving ability. Last year, Joe Mixon caught 30 passes. He was only thrown 34 balls. That's 88% catch rate. It is a fantastic number, something that even Christian McCaffrey did not have something that high. He was limited on total usage. Marvin Lewis does not like to use rookie running backs.
Hates rookie running backs.
But it's going to be his turn to lead this offense. The Cincinnati Bengals are going to run the whole offense through Joe Mixon. It's going to be his team. And if they want to win football games, he's going to get tons of touches. I'm expecting him to get over 250 rushing attempts, close to 50 to 60 receiving or receptions on this year. And I think he's got a chance to be a top 10 running back in fantasy football.
Fair enough, Tom. Fair enough. I am a big believer in Joe Mixon. Love Joe Mixon. And I can see your points coming across there. Like you said, sophomore year, now's the time for Joe Mixon to shine. So my keep is going to be one, Dalvin Cook. Dalvin Cook, man. So if you look at his stats from last year, fantasy-wise, PPR, Game 1, 16.7 points. Game 2, 8.4. Game 3, 27.9. Blew up there. And then 12.4 after that, and then he suffered his torn ACL. But if you look at the amount of carries that he was given, 22 carries the first game, 12 carries the second game. That's where his down point usage was, or total was. And then 27 carries, and then 13 carries. But he was also catching the ball out of the backfield as well. He had a total of, I believe, 11 catches last year out of the backfield. Then you look at running back Latavius Murray, who was also on the Vikings. Latavius Murray had 216 rushes, 842 yards, 8 touchdowns. Those touches, at least half of those, I think, are going to go to one Dalvin Cook. And you got to look at, like I said before, the departed Jerick McKinnon. Not a lot of people think he's the greatest running back in the world, but you know what he did is he caught the ball there and he had some usage. 178 fantasy points from Jerick McKinnon when he was on the Minnesota Vikings. That 178 points plus the points that you look at Latavius Murray had could easily go to Dalvin Cook if Dalvin Cook is completely healthy. Other thing that you have to look at, Kirk Cousins. What happened with running backs around Kirk Cousins? Chris Thompson. He was able to catch the ball out of the backfield. He was a viable fantasy starter, running back 2, flex option, right? Samaje Perine, maybe not. Rob Kelly, maybe not either. But at certain times, they were able to be used as starters. But with Kirk Cousins there, being able to distribute the ball a little bit better, I think, than the quarterbacks that they had last year, Dalvin Cook should be in line for a huge fantasy season this year. Not just this year, but because we're talking about dynasty leagues as well. Kirk Cousins is going to be there for a little bit. He's set up for the long term here. And I love Dalvin Cook as my keep option.
I completely agree with you, Josh. If you average out what Dalvin Cook got in the 3.5 games that he actually played, he was going to average out to over 1,600 rushing yards on the season, over 100 yards per game from running the football. He's an excellent running back. He was my number 2 running back coming out of the draft last year. Joe Mixon was my number 1. That's what made this very hard for me because I absolutely love both of these guys. And Cook, he's got amazing balance. He's got amazing vision. His cutback ability is fantastic. And he got hurt early in the year last year. That's why I'm not really worried about the ACL injury.
Exactly.
Guys come back from that. If, let's say, he tore that in week 15, it'd be a big-time different story, and people would be worried about him actually making an impact in the first couple games of the year. But he's going to be fresh, and I have no doubt that he's going to be a stud fantasy running back.
And just kind of give you guys a little context here, too. You look at Dalvin Cook's total stats from last year. 74 rushes, 354 yards, 2 touchdowns. 11 receptions, 90 yards receiving. 11 receptions, 90 yards receiving. Joe Mixon, 14 games played, 178 yards rushing, 626 yards, 178 attempts, 626 yards, 4 touchdowns, 30 receptions, 287 yards. We haven't even gotten to Christian McCaffrey yet.
Yep.
But if you look at it, he had 117 rushes on the year. 16 games he played. 117 rushes, 16 games. That's not much more than what Mr. Dalvin Cook had and only in 4 games. 435 yards, not even 100 yards more, and 2 touchdowns, same as Dalvin Cook, but where he did flourish was in the receiving game with 80 yards reception, 651 yards, and 5 touchdowns. So, very interesting. Moving on. Let's do our, who are you going to trade?
For me, I'm going to trade Dalvin Cook right now in Dynasty format. You're getting the most out of him. He's being drafted before Christian McCaffrey or Joe Mixon on average. So I feel like if I'm trading him at this point, I can get the most return in value from Dalvin Cook. You did a great job explaining everything good about him. The only things I'm really worried about him, I don't think he's going to be a prolific goal line runner. He's not one of those running backs that can produce a ton of yards after contact. Normally, once he's hit in the backfield, he's stopped. But his vision and balance is so excellent, and that's what makes him be able to get around defenders and just pretty much get glancing blows instead of getting blown up in the backfield all the time. Also worried about him catching the football. 5 drops in 3.5 games. That was a quarter of the total drops the Minnesota Vikings had the whole season, and that was only from Dalvin Cook in 3.5 games. But everything else with Dalvin Cook, a big-time fan of him. And if you have to trade him right now, you're going to get good time return in your value.
Yeah, you look at Dalvin Cook, and he is getting drafted as the 9th running back overall, usually at the end of the first round, early second round. Then if you're looking at Christian McCaffrey, the 11th running back off the board. And then if you're looking at Joe Mixon, the 14th running back off the board. So all pretty similar. Me personally, if I'm going to get rid of one of these 3, and if I'm going to trade them away, I'm trading away Christian McCaffrey. Reason being is kind of what we just talked about. Those stats right there, those rushing stats. And if he had 117 rushes last year, for 435 yards and 2 touchdowns. I've seen him on the field. He's not the biggest player out there, even though his Instagram pictures do make him look very, very large. Jacked. But you have to remember the running back that is going to the Carolina Panthers, and that is C.J. Anderson. A lot of people don't think he's going to take a lot of the carries away from Christian McCaffrey, but Christian McCaffrey was not drafted to be the quote-unquote workhorse goal line back. Christian McCaffrey is the guy catching the ball in space and probably rushing the ball at max, I think, maybe like 180 times. That's probably where I peg it at. C.J. Anderson was a 1,000-yard rusher last year.
One of the quietest 1,000-yard seasons we've seen.
And we did a very good comparison, we saw a very good comparison between him and Leonard Fournette. Like, their numbers are very similar, C.J. Anderson-wise. But I think with PPR leagues, a lot of these people in PPR leagues, fantasy owners, they think about mostly just the receptions because you get a full point per reception. That's 80 fantasy points for Christian McCaffrey last year, not even including the receiving yards or the receiving touchdowns. But if you find an owner that loves that PPR aspect where they are getting a point per reception, and they like the fact that Jonathan Stewart is now gone out of that Carolina backfield, that is somebody that you can trade Christian McCaffrey to and feel pretty good with your return that you're going to get back. Because you're not going to get crap back. You're going to get a good return back for a sophomore running back going into that second year. That's where I'm at with that.
And you were just talking about McCaffrey. He's the guy that I would have cut.
Yeah.
Already talked about Cook and Mixon. Look, McCaffrey, extremely talented running back, was the 2nd running back drafted overall in one of the best running back classes we have ever seen. It might be the best one we've ever seen. Tons of talent in that class. And you brought up with C.J. Anderson. I think that might hurt his value. Yeah. Once Jay Stu left, I think a lot of people were thinking that, he's going to be that 200 rushing attempt, 80 to 100 catch running back. I don't think that's the case. I think what we saw from CMC last year was kind of what they want him to be in that offense. And the one thing that I think is kind of crazy right now, Christian McCaffrey, he's not the normal bell cow running back. And if you're not in a full-point PPR league, I think you're kind of crazy taking him in the top 15 running backs. He just will not bring that touchdown value. And you compare his stat line to any running back in the league, and one of the most accurate ones is Duke Johnson.
Yeah.
And Duke Johnson's being drafted, I believe it's the 8th or 9th round, and McCaffrey's being taken middle of the 2nd. And their stat lines were almost identical. CMC, 80 receptions, 651 yards, 5 receiving touchdowns. Duke, 74 receptions, 693 yards, 3 receiving touchdowns. CMC's rushing stat line, 435 yards, 2 rushing touchdowns. Duke, 348 and 4. Almost identical numbers, and there's 6 rounds difference in where they're going. It's absolutely nuts. It's that newness factor. It's that he's a white running back. Everyone's so enamored with that. Like, it is kind of funny, but it's the fact. Like, we've only had 1 year out of Christian McCaffrey, but with what he's shown on the football field, he shouldn't be drafted as a top 10 to 12 running back right now, in my opinion.
Yeah, Duke Johnson's going off the board, according to FantasyFootballCalculator.com, as the 33rd running back off the board, round 7, mid of round 7, so around there. But yeah, Tom, I do tend to agree with that. Yeah, it's funny when we sit here and talk about this, right? Who owns Dalvin Cook and Mixon and Christian McCaffrey in our fantasy league? Us, right?
Yeah.
You own the 2 and I own the 1. So it's pretty funny that these were the 3 people that we actually talked about, but these were the 3 running backs that we thought that could have had some of the best fantasy implications for year 1 and year 2. You also have to remember, going back to your cut portion with Christian McCaffrey, this is also a guy that was returning punts and returning kickoffs last year. Again, if Christian McCaffrey does up his usage to 180 rushes, right? I think then your idea of him being a quote-unquote number 1 is a little bit better. But I think right now, theoretically, you should be drafting Christian McCaffrey as a high-end number 2. Right now, like we said, he's going as running back number 11. That's a low-end 1, which is... I like the high end too. It's hard to put all your eggs in one basket, saying that Christian McCaffrey is going to be your 1 to carry your team, especially if you're not in a full PPR league. But if you're in a full PPR, you better be hoping that he's going to be taking some of those touches that Jonathan Stewart now does not have, and you better be hoping that CJ Anderson does not take any of those either.
For me and for CMC, I think for him to be like that bona fide stud number 1 running back where he's kind of being drafted right now, he needs to have over 150 to 175 rushing attempts this year. If he does not get that, I think we've kind of seen his ceiling with the 80 receptions last year. That's a lot. And plus, I don't think that offensive line really improved. They lost Andrew Norwell. He signed with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Really didn't bring anyone in. So it'll be interesting. But he does give you a very nice floor in fantasy football. He averages close to 5 or 6 receptions per game. So if you're in a full PPR league, you just automatically put in 5 or 6 points right there. Yeah. And that is a nice floor for fantasy. And having a solid fantasy floor is super important if you want to be competitive in leagues.
My cut, obviously, is Joe Mixon, and I'm one of the bigger Joe Mixon fans, and I actually traded Joe Mixon to you last year. But that Marvin Lewis situation, the Bengals, it just, in my opinion, that is what held me back from doing a trade or a keep with Joe Mixon. Yeah. And honestly, that is really it. And I have nothing else to say because Joe Mixon, when given the chance, could be probably one of the better running backs in this league. I did a comparison to him when we were doing our draft breakdowns. We said that Joe Mixon has a little bit of David Johnson in his game, which he does. And I would hate to be a guy that cuts David Johnson, even though I did when I had him, because I needed a player for a bye week, idiot. But at the same time, this would be a spot where I think I could get the most out of Christian McCaffrey in a trade, and if I had to cut one of them, Joe Mixon would be the one I had to cut.
Yeah, and if I was super close with keeping Dalvin Cook in this scenario, because I do like him. I'm wearing a freaking Dalvin Cook jersey while we're doing this podcast, but with me keeping Mixon, that's mainly the only reason our thoughts on this kind of changed a little bit. And Mixon, I just really like what he brings to the table, man. Even his receiving ability. Had a 67-yard reception last year. He's got that big play threat. If that offensive line is just somewhat better, it's going to be looking good for Joe Mixon this year.
Yeah, if they get any help from the Red Rocket, right? That's his name. They call him the Red Rifle, but his real nickname is the Red Rocket. So if they get some help from that stupid-ass quarterback that they have and some of those wide receivers, we should see Joe Mixon explode in fantasy, hopefully, from here on out. But, again, our cut, keep, and trade were... Who'd you have again, Tom?
I cut Christian McCaffrey, I kept Joe Mixon, and I traded Dalvin Cook.
All right. Me, I kept Dalvin Cook, traded Christian McCaffrey, and cut, regretfully, the great Joe Mixon.
This is tough.
It is.
I would feel comfortable having any of these three running backs on my team. You know, I'd feel good about it. But we had to get rid of one, had to trade one, and we're only fortunate enough to keep one of them.
Hope you guys enjoyed this. It was fun for us, and I'm sure you guys kind of gave you something to think about because you got to think about with Dalvin Cook, right? Jerick McKinnon's gone. Latavius Murray's still there. C.J. Anderson's going to the Panthers. The offensive line issues / improvements with the Bengals. We're going to do this a couple more times, probably throughout the year, probably once a week. Kind of give you guys a new look and a new idea for guys that are going around the same ADP, which is average draft position. And, of course, we're not going to just do the big-name guys. We're going to do some lower-end guys, too, that you guys are thinking about later in drafts. So it'll be fun. I think so, at least. Anything else?
That's all I got, my man.
All right, man, that's all we have. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Be on the lookout for episodes coming up. And, we'll see you next time. Again, we are Pony Keg Sports. You guys can follow us on Twitter at Pony Keg Sports, at Pony_Keg_Tom, and at Fight Talk Tim. And until next time.